He stole a loaf of bread. The courtroom laughed, until the judge read his name and stood up, shaking. Brooklyn, New York. Early winter. The sky hung low with clouds the color of steel, and the streets smelled like damp concrete and distant traffic fumes. On a corner not far from Morelli's Market, a man hunched over a trash can, sorting through discarded soda cans with a slow, practiced rhythm. His name was Franklin Brooks, age 67. A veteran, a ghost, a fixture. People passed by without a glance. Those who noticed him called him the Quiet Vet. But most didn't bother with a name. Franklin was thin, wiry. His beard, once sharp and military neat, now tangled with gray. His jacket was faded army green, the stitching undone at the shoulders. He carried a canvas backpack with a frayed American flag patch, the straps worn from decades of use. He never begged, never shouted. He simply existed, moving from alley to sidewalk to doorway like a leaf drifting in the cold. 15 years ago, he had a life, a modest apartment, a pension, a woman named Lillian who made his world feel warm even on the coldest nights. When she died, cancer, misdiagnosed by the VA hospital, Franklin unraveled. He donated everything he had to the charity Lillian loved most. Then he walked away. From his home, from his identity, from himself. Sometimes it's easier to disappear than to be the man who failed the person he loved most, he once told a soup kitchen volunteer. Since then, Franklin lived among the forgotten. Teenagers occasionally mocked him. Some shop owners hosed down the pavement where he slept. Police moved him along like trash in the wind. He never fought back. Just kept walking. The night before his arrest, the temperature dropped to 23 degrees. Franklin hadn't eaten in 3 days. He could feel his knees buckling when he stepped into Morelli's Corner Market, a small neighborhood shop he remembered from years ago, back when Mr. Morelli himself would hand him a warm slice of bread without a word. But the shop had changed hands. New management, new rules, new mirrors near the ceiling. Franklin moved slowly past the shelves. His fingers trembled as he picked up a day-old loaf wrapped in plastic. No butter, no jam, just bread. He slipped it inside his coat. He was 5 feet from the door when the shopkeeper yelled, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Franklin turned. He didn't run, didn't resist. "I just needed the strength to live one more day," he said quietly. The police arrived minutes later. 2 officers, one older, indifferent, the other younger. Officer Brandon Ellis, fresh-faced and unsure. As Officer Ellis handcuffed him, he noticed the chain around Franklin's neck. "Dog tags?" he asked. Franklin nodded. "Used to be someone useful." "You a vet?" "I was." Officer Ellis hesitated. "Sorry, sir. Store owner's pressing charges. Says you've been caught before." At the precinct, Franklin was treated like any other shoplifter. Fingerprinted, booked, given a public defender who didn't ask many questions and spoke faster than Franklin could answer. The court date was set for the next morning. That night, Franklin slept on a cold metal bench in holding. No blanket, no pillow. Just the hum of a fluorescent light above his head and the distant sound of coughing from another cell. He kept his backpack close, clutching it like a lifeline. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a photo of Lillian, smiling, frozen in time. The next morning, Franklin was led into the Brooklyn Municipal Courthouse wearing the same clothes, now even more wrinkled. No one waited in the gallery. No family, no friends. Just reporters glancing up from their phones and clerks moving through motions on autopilot. Case no nominosto 471,027, State of New York versus Franklin Elias Brooks. The prosecutor was young, sharp suit, quick tongue. "Your Honor, The defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread. Given his previous citations for minor theft, lack of a fixed address, and zero employment record, we recommend continued detention. At the bench sat Judge Edward Harmond, known throughout the borough as fast, cold, and by the book. He barely looked up. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "how do you plead?" Franklin's voice was raspy, but firm. "Guilty, Your Honor." A soft chuckle came from somewhere in the back row. Someone whispered, "Another freeloader." Judge Harmond frowned slightly, annoyed by the noise, but his eyes were still on the file in front of him. Franklin Elias Brooks, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. The judge's voice trailed off. Silence. Cold, thick, like a storm just before it breaks. Judge Harmond suddenly stood. The courtroom froze. Judges never stand during these hearings. His hand clutched the edge of the bench, knuckles white. He stared at Franklin, then at the file, then back again. The air seemed to disappear from the room. Then, without explanation, Judge Harmond's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "Court will recess 15 minutes." As the courtroom doors swung shut, the room buzzed with confusion. No one understood why Judge Harmond, stoic, cold, famously unsentimental, had just stood up and recessed a case over a homeless man stealing bread. Some reporters leaned toward each other, whispering theories. A few onlookers rolled their eyes. Just another dramatic delay in a city full of them. But Judge Harmond wasn't in the courtroom anymore. He was in his chambers, his breathing unsteady, his hands trembling as he pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, wrapped in a faded piece of cloth, was a photograph. An old one, creased from years of being folded. A group of men in dusty fatigues stood in front of a battered tent under a harsh sun. Iraq, 2003. There he was, 20 years younger, Private First Class Edward Harmond, barely recognizable with a shaved head and wide, frightened eyes. And behind him, towering over the group, stood a man with a square jaw, a firm grip on a clipboard, and a protective stance like he owned the ground he walked on. Staff Sergeant Franklin Brooks. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and typed into a restricted database, the one he still had access to because of his years working on the Veterans Justice Panel. He searched the name, Brooks, Franklin Elias, and there it was. 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Logistics and transport, Bronze Star for valor, Purple Heart for wounds sustained while extracting personnel from a burning convoy under enemy fire. Then came the mission report. Fallujah, July 2003. A medic was hit during a chaotic ambush. Brooks had carried the wounded man 2 miles under fire, shrapnel in his own leg, refusing treatment until the medic was stabilized. The medic's name? PFC Edward Harmond. Judge Harmond whispered, "My God, he's the reason I'm alive." He stared at the screen, overwhelmed. This man, the homeless man who just pled guilty to stealing bread, had once dragged him bleeding through sand and smoke so thick he couldn't see the stars. And now he sat in Harmond's courtroom, hands cuffed, face sunken from hunger. Judge Harmond picked up the phone. His voice was calm but urgent. "I need you here, now." On the other end of the line, Colonel James Hawthorne, retired commander of the 25th Combat Support Unit, sat up straighter in his chair. "It's about Brooks," the judge said. "You found him?" Hawthorne's voice cracked. "I didn't find him," Harmond replied. "He found me, and he doesn't even know it." "I'm on my way," Hawthorne said. "Don't let that man leave your courtroom." Meanwhile, Franklin sat alone in the holding cell beneath the courthouse. The same bread he had tried to steal had been tossed in with his booking paperwork, and now sat stale on the metal bench beside him. He didn't eat. His stomach twisted too tightly. A young corrections officer, Officer Kennedy, passed by and paused. He glanced at the old man's dog tags, the calloused hands, the frost-bitten knuckles. "You really a vet?" he asked cautiously. Franklin didn't look up, just nodded. Kennedy hesitated. "Thanks for your service, sir," he muttered, before moving on. No one had said that to Franklin in years. Upstairs, the news had started to spread. A local blog caught wind of the unusual delay and published a headline: "Judge recesses petty theft trial after hearing homeless man's name. Who is Franklin Brooks?" The comments were ruthless. "Another stolen valor scam. Should have locked him up faster. Rail vets don't steal." But within the comments, one stood out. "Franklin Brooks saved my father in Iraq. If it's the same man, he's a damn hero." At noon, back in the judge's chambers, Colonel Hawthorne arrived. Uniformed, straight-backed, decorated. In his hand a folder, yellowed with time, but stamped with the Department of Defense seal. He laid it on the desk. "Not just a Bronze Star," he said, tapping the file. "He was recommended for the Silver Star." Bureaucracy stole it. Judge Harmond flipped through the documents: battlefield commendations, testimonials from former soldiers, and, at the very back, a photo. One that had once appeared in the New York Times. Brooks, cradling an Afghan child, rushing toward a medevac helicopter under fire. And next to the folder, Hawthorne slid a handwritten note on military letterhead. "Franklin Brooks is not a criminal. He is a symbol of a country that forgets its own heroes. Do not let this pass quietly." The judge made one final call, this time to the VA. He demanded immediate access to Brooks' benefits file. Within minutes, a clerk confirmed the mistake. Brooks' pension and medical support had been terminated in 2008 due to an undeliverable address. For 17 years, he had been eligible for $1,370.00 per month, but never received a "That's over $246,000, Harmond whispered. "And no one noticed?" "No one ever looked," Hawthorne replied. Back in holding, Franklin leaned against the cold wall, eyes closed, arms crossed over his chest. In his coat pocket, he clutched the plastic-wrapped photo of Lillian, her smile still radiant, untouched by time. He used to talk to her. Every night. "Almost there, Lil," he whispered. "Just holding on a little longer." Officer Ellis, the same young officer who had arrested him, walked by the cell. He stopped, looked at Franklin again. Something in his gut twisted. "You carried a man 2 miles under fire?" he asked. Franklin blinked, confused. "How do—" "They're talking about you upstairs," Ellis said. "The judge. A colonel. You saved them." Franklin looked down. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Ellis said quietly. "Most wouldn't have." Back in the courtroom, the bailiff was instructed to reopen the session. Reporters rushed in. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but journalists packed every inch of the gallery. People had sensed something was coming. Franklin was brought in, still wearing the same coat, the same worn boots. But now, at the defense table, sat someone new. Robert Hale, senior counsel with the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. Franklin stared at him, puzzled. "Someone took an interest in your case," Hale said. "Let's just say people remember who you are now." The judge entered. Everyone stood, but it was the presence behind him that caught Franklin's eye. 3 decorated military officers filed in and sat behind the prosecution's table. Their medals gleamed, their posture straight. One of them, Colonel Hawthorne, nodded slowly at Franklin. The judge took his seat, cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, This court will hear sworn testimony concerning the defendant's background. It is material to these proceedings." Franklin looked stunned. Then Hawthorne stood and took the witness stand. "My name is Colonel James Hawthorne, United States Army, retired. I served with Staff Sergeant Franklin Brooks during Operation Phantom Fury. He saved my life. He saved many lives." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The colonel continued. "South. Hanley didn't just drive a burning fuel truck away from our position. He did it knowing it would likely kill him. He suffered second-degree burns, refused evacuation, and carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Edward Harmond, 2 miles through enemy fire. That medic is now the judge presiding over this case." Gasps. Reporters scribbled furiously. Judge Harmond didn't blink, but his voice softened as he addressed the room. "I never knew his name, just a call sign. Brooks. I tried to find him for years. And now? He's standing before me in chains." The prosecutor stood, visibly shaken. "Your Honor, given these revelations and the material errors surrounding Mr. Brooks' military record and lack of access to benefits, the state moves to dismiss all charges with prejudice," Judge Harmond said firmly. "Let it be so ordered." He turned to Franklin. "You are free to go, and on behalf of a nation that forgot you." "I'm sorry." The courtroom was still reeling. A war hero in handcuffs, a judge who owed him his life, and now an entire justice system exposed for forgetting the very people it once depended on. Colonel Hawthorne stepped down from the witness stand and approached Franklin. "This country let you slip through the cracks, Sergeant," he said. "We won't let it happen again." Franklin, still processing everything, couldn't find the words. His eyes locked with the judge's. Judge Harmond removed his glasses and slowly stood. "Mr. Brooks," he said, voice steady but raw. "Protocol prevents me from presiding over cases involving personal connection. Yesterday, I didn't recognize you. I had no idea you were the man who carried me through gunfire in Fallujah. But today, I remember everything." A collective hush fell over the courtroom. Franklin finally spoke, his voice low, measured. "I was just doing my job, sir." Judge Harmond looked down, nodded. "No, you were doing far more than that, and we failed to do the same for you." Outside, the story had exploded. Homeless war hero saves judge in Iraq, wrongfully arrested for stealing bread. Courtroom stuns as judge reveals soldier saved his life. Within hours, national outlets picked it up. Cable news segments dissected every second of the hearing. News anchors called it the most moving moment in modern court history. Social media erupted. The hashtag #RememberBrooks trended globally by evening. Comment sections that had once been filled with mockery turned reflective. "I walked past this man last year, never even looked at him. We owe people like him more than applause. This isn't just about one vet. This is about all of them." That afternoon, Judge Harmond, now recused from the case, met with Franklin in chambers, this time as a civilian, not a judge, not a soldier, just a man who had waited 2 decades to say something that mattered. "You carried me 2 miles, he said softly. "I was bleeding out. You told me, 'Keep breathing, kid. Your story's not over.' That stayed with me. Every day. Those words built my life." Franklin looked at him, the fog in his eyes slowly clearing. "I didn't know who you were," he said. "I didn't either," Harmond smiled, "until today." Meanwhile, the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance launched an emergency appeal to the VA. They demanded immediate restoration of Franklin's benefits and an investigation into the 17-year error that left a decorated soldier homeless. By midnight, the VA issued a formal apology and announced the beginning of a nationwide audit of all benefit terminations post-2008. Franklin's back pay, over $246,000, 0 cents, was fast-tracked. But something even more unexpected happened. People gave. A GoFundMe started by a local student who had seen Franklin collecting bottles near Prospect Park raised over $200,000, 0 cents, in 48 hours. Comments flooded in from strangers, veterans, teachers, single moms, and even a few politicians. One read, "Served in the same division. He doesn't just carry weight, he carries people." Another, "My dad died in Iraq. Brooks brought his body back. We never knew his name until now." At the next hearing, Franklin arrived not in cuffs, but in a tailored jacket donated by a veterans group. His beard was trimmed, his eyes clearer. As he stepped into the room, the audience, filled with military officers, veterans, and community leaders, rose to their feet in silence. The new judge on the case, Marissa Lee, delivered the formal dismissal of all charges and issued a personal statement. "Mr. Brooks, the criminal justice system often moves swiftly, but rarely justly. Today it pauses to acknowledge a truth long overdue. You are not a number in a file. You are a name this country must remember." Franklin bowed his head. No smile, just quiet acknowledgement. But the moment wasn't over. As the courtroom cleared, a woman in her 30s approached him, tears already in her eyes. "Uncle Franklin?" she asked, voice shaking. "It's me. It's Emma, Lillian's niece." He blinked. Emma reached into her coat and pulled out a faded Polaroid, her and Lillian seated on a porch in Georgia. A time long gone, a life that had once been whole. "We've been searching for you for years," she said. "You just vanished." Franklin's knees buckled slightly. For the first time in 15 years, someone touched him, not to restrain, but to hold. He cried, not because he was free, but because someone remembered. That evening, news crews filmed as Franklin left the courthouse, flanked by Colonel Hawthorne and Judge Harmond. A sea of applause followed him down the steps. Mr. Morelli, the shop owner who had called the police in the first place, pushed through the crowd. "I had no idea," he said, shaken. "I saw a problem, not a person. I judged you, and I'm ashamed." Franklin didn't speak, just nodded, then walked past. In the following weeks, Franklin's story reshaped the national conversation. Editorials called him a symbol of both American heroism and American neglect. The Grady Initiative, named in his honor, was introduced in Congress, aimed at creating legal protection and oversight for veterans who slip through bureaucratic cracks. One moment, one name, one silent man changed the system just by being seen. But Franklin didn't want attention. He'd declined most interviews. When reporters reached out, he simply said, "Not a story. I'm a reminder." Still, a single photo began to circulate again, now restored in high resolution. The 2003 image. Franklin sprinting through the chaos of Fallujah with an injured Afghan child in his arms. Beneath it, social media users began pairing a new photo. Him sleeping on cardboard in a Brooklyn alley. Two truths. One man. A question. How did this happen? 6 days later, Franklin stood in the chambers of the judge he once carried. His military decorations, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and campaign ribbons, were formally pinned to a new dress uniform. Veterans Affairs presented him with his back pay and an additional settlement for emotional damages and systemic failure. He stood behind the microphone and addressed a room of veterans, advocates, and politicians. "I don't want pity," he said, voice steady. "I want change." He paused, looked out at the faces, some in suits, some in uniform, some holding flags. I once protected this country. Today, this country protected me back. Let's make sure no one else has to wait this long to be seen. A standing ovation followed, not just for what he endured, but for who he still was. Weeks passed, but the impact didn't fade. Brooklyn had never seen anything quite like it. In front of the courthouse where Franklin Brooks once stood, handcuffed and silent, a new bronze plaque was unveiled. It didn't just list his name or rank. It told a story. Etched in bronze was the image of a soldier carrying a wounded man through fire. Franklin carrying a young Private Harmond across the sands of Fallujah. Beneath it, a simple line. Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians, teens with hoodies beside generals in uniform. Reporters, teachers, grandparents, kids. Some clapped, some cried. The mayor took the mic. "Too often," he said, "we honor veterans only in memory. Today, we honor one in life." He then announced a new program, the Brooks Initiative, a city-fund effort to provide legal aid, housing advocacy, and emergency aid to homeless veterans. Applause thundered, but Franklin remained quiet, seated near the front, his posture upright, his expression unreadable. Later that evening, Judge Harmond invited Franklin to dinner. A small table. His wife, his teenage son Caleb, who had been watching the news obsessively. At one point during the meal, Caleb leaned in. "Sir, are you angry about everything that happened?" Franklin took a long sip of tea, then looked at the boy with a softness rarely seen in his eyes. "I'm not angry," he said slowly. "I'm grateful, because some stories don't end the way they start." Caleb looked down, then smiled. "I want to join the army," he said, "because of you." Franklin chuckled for the first time in a long while. "Then do it right. Not for medals, not for politics, for people." The next day, Franklin visited Veterans Village, a supportive housing community built for soldiers who had nowhere else to go. The director offered him a room, clean, quiet, his own. For the first time since Lillian's death, Franklin had a door he could close, a bed, a mailbox. He didn't put much inside, just a few framed photos, Lillian on their wedding day, his unit in Iraq, the judge, smiling, and one of Emma hugging him outside the courtroom. Each morning he walked to Prospect Park, passing the bench where he once slept in the freezing cold. Now, kids played nearby. Joggers passed with nods of recognition. People knew who he was, but more importantly, they respected who he had been all along. Word spread to local schools. Teachers invited Franklin to speak to their students, not as a cautionary tale, but as a voice of experience. He spoke plainly, no sugarcoating, just facts. "War teaches you how to survive," he told one group of teens, "but grief teaches you how to disappear. Don't let it." One teacher later wrote, "The kids didn't just listen, they leaned in. They felt him." At one school assembly, a 10-year-old boy raised his hand. "Shy, curious. Do you still feel like a soldier, sir?" Franklin paused, then answered, "I feel like someone who never stopped protecting something, even when no one saw it." The crowd stood in applause. That night, Franklin sat by his apartment window, sipping tea. The moonlight hit the wall of photos. His hand rested on Lillian's picture. He whispered, "I told you I'd hold on." For the first time in 15 years, he slept with the door closed. Not because he feared the world, but because he finally had a place in it. 6 months later, Franklin Brooks stood at attention inside Fort Hamilton. The fall wind cut across the base, crisp and sharp, but his stance didn't falter. His uniform was pressed, his medals polished, his posture proud. The same man once dismissed as a shadow was now front and center. Honored on Veterans Day before a crowd of thousands. Young recruits watched him closely. High school students, local families, even politicians lined the front rows. And when Franklin stepped to the podium, there was no grand introduction, no fanfare, just silence. He began simply. "I once carried men through fire," he said. But what burned longer than the flames was being forgotten. A hush spread through the audience. "I don't want pity. I don't want headlines. I want something harder to give. Awareness. Change." He paused, scanning the crowd. "For years I walked past you, slept under your windows, waited at your bus stops. You didn't see me. I don't blame you. I didn't see myself either." He placed a hand on the lectern. "But kindness is never too late. It just needs someone patient enough to wait for it." The silence broke with a slow, rising wave of applause. Military personnel, young and old, stood and saluted. Civilians followed. Some placed their hands over their hearts, others wiped their eyes. Franklin stepped down from the stage, but the respect followed him like a tide, finally coming in. That evening, back at Veterans Village, Franklin received a letter, handwritten, no return address. It read, "You carried me when I couldn't walk. I hope this world now carries you. Thank you for surviving." Inside the envelope was a single ribbon, Combat Medic Badge, from Harmond. No words, just the weight of gratitude in silence. Later that week, a group of high schoolers installed a small sculpture in Prospect Park, right near the bench Franklin once slept on. It was simple, a bronze hand holding a pair of dog tags extended outward. At its base, a plaque read, "Not every uniform is worn, not every hero is seen, but some never." Tourists stopped to take pictures. Teachers brought students. Veterans left coins. One little girl placed a note in crayon that said, "Thank you for being strong when I feel weak." Franklin visited once, stood there a while, then walked away without a word. In Washington, D.C., the Brooks Initiative was adopted as a federal model. Legislation was introduced to prevent wrongful termination of veterans' benefits. A task force was established to track missing veteran records. And at the base of the Capitol, someone quietly placed a photo of Franklin with the Afghan child from Fallujah, next to a folded flag. You may never meet someone like Franklin Brooks, but you've probably walked past one, sat beside one on the train, glanced past someone at a crosswalk who had once fought for a flag they now sleep under. The truth is, stories like his aren't rare. What's rare is when someone finally listens. So ask yourself, how do we build a country that sees the invisible? How do we honor not just medals, but memory? How do we protect those who once protected us? Because justice delayed isn't justice denied, but only if we fight to correct it. If you've ever witnessed someone misjudged, if you've ever carried pain that no one saw, if you've ever believed your story was over, did Franklin's remind you it's not. Keep breathing. Your story isn't over. Share this video with someone who needs to believe again. In truth, in justice, in the quiet strength that never gives up.